Well, hello, it's Mark Leonard with your video thought for the day. So I'm standing in front of some bookshelves. They're a little goofy in a sense, but I've got here two bookends. And the only reason I say they're goofy is not because bird nests are goofy, but normally bookends would be at one end of a set of books and then at the other end of a set of books, instead of like using the bookshelf and using the bookends to hold them against the shelves. But you got to be familiar with the concept of bookends, right? So bookends are typically a reference to the start and the end of something. And that's what I want to talk about this week in my video thoughts for the day. I want to talk about some biblical examples of bookends. In other words, where in the Bible do we find one idea that's bookended by the same idea later on? Now, the Bible, as a collection of 66 some odd different books written over 1,000-year time span, still has some amazing bookends in it. And the one that I want to talk about today, the very first one, is in a sense one of the first and last bookends in the Bible. This is a bookend that starts in the book of Genesis at the very beginning and is bookended in the book of Revelation. So that Revelation passage only makes sense in its fullest sense if you understand it as a bookend of what was already discussed over 1,000 years earlier in the book of Genesis. Here's what we've got. In Genesis, God creates an incredible world. Now, don't get bogged down in the science and all the rest of that stuff. That's not the point here. God creates an incredible world, but out of all of the world and all of the universe and everything he made, including time itself, something unique is made. It's unique because it bears the reflection or the image of God himself. And that is woman and man. And man and woman are made, male and female, to reflect God's nature in so many different ways. Now, they're not unlimited, but they still have this special conscious personality that is a reflection in some ways of the personage of God. And so God makes man and woman with an ability to be in a relationship with God. And man and woman are. They're placed in a magnificent garden, and God walks with them and talks to them and guides them and gives them instruction and provides for them. It's a marvelous relationship. And then sin enters the picture. And sin at its core is a rebellion against God. It's a selfish morality that says, I'm going to do what I want, contrary to what God wants. And once that happens, there's a level of separation that took place. And it's one where sin is corrupting, and sin is destructive, and sin is rightly destroyed. It's a cancer, if you will. And so God says that sin will bring death and sin will bring destruction. But in the process of that, God says, however, I, God, am going to step in and make a change. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to handle this problem of sin in such a way that there can still be a relationship between the divine and the created. And the story of the Bible is a story of God's fulfilling that promise as he faithfully works through not just Noah and the survivors of the flood, but he calls Abraham and says he'll work through Abraham's offspring, and he does, and he further delineates it as the offspring of Isaac, as the offspring of Jacob, as the offspring of Judah, as the line of David, and he further delineates how he's going to do this masterful work until God himself comes in the form of Jesus and does the work. Now, the work was dying for the sins that you and I should die for, and God resurrecting in power Jesus. That's what's done. But the cool part is the end of the Bible is a book called Revelation, and it talks about the end of days. And it says that there's going to come a time where Jesus returns and he takes his people as his own. And there's this really cool bookend passage at the end of Revelation. It says, and the dwelling of God will be with men, and he will dwell with them. Men being people. In other words, you've got a bookend. The Bible starts with God dwelling with people. God walking and talking and providing for a relationship. Sin enters, sin disturbs the relationship, redemption is bought, and then at the end of the book is the bookend back to the beginning that says, promise, God will again dwell with his people. And there'll be an intimacy. So I'm thinking about that today. I'm going to be thinking about bookends all week, but I love the fact that the Bible tells a story that God fulfills in due time. Because as we'll see tomorrow, he does that in our individual lives as well. Think about it. We'll talk some more tomorrow, but that's your video thought for the day.